Welcome to another episode of the IT Woodworker. I'm Chris Kousoulas, your host, and I'm joined with Brian Gebhardt. Brian, welcome. Thanks for being on the podcast this afternoon.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, great. Well, I try to get the intelligent people on here. It kind of offsets the balance of having me on the other side of the monitor. So appreciate the insight we're going to get from you today. So in full disclosure here, Brian and I are co-workers. We both work for Nutanix, and the topic of our conversation today is going to be HCI, or hyper-converged infrastructure. So Brian is a sales engineer with the organization. And Brian, why don't we start out here and just give us a little background about you? How did you get into IT? How long have you been in IT for? Those kind of things.
Sure. So I didn't know that we were going to have to do math on this, but I've been in IT now for 26 years, I think it is.
Okay.
So I always, when I was younger, I did a lot of stuff with computers. Going, way back, my mom brought in, she did some data entry stuff, and she was going to school and learning to do a few things, and she brought home an old TRS-80 terminal with an old, modem coupler
Nice.
and
Now you're dating yourself.
yes. So I started with that and would call in at the time, just before the internet, right? Call into billboards and things and just started kind of hacking around. And so I was always, really into computers. And so when I graduated high school, I had no clue what I wanted to do, and eventually found my way at a school for software engineering and went through that. I did like it, but when I was at school, I started working at Motorola, and I was a backup administrator. Started with that team. Started as kind of a tape jockey, and just kind of progressed up that team pretty quickly, and then ended up leaving there and starting with a VAR, and that was where I really where my kind of career took off to some degree. I mean, I was there for 15 years, and then decided to come over to Nutanix. I've been here for almost 8, so I've only had in my career 3 employers.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's kind of how I got just that was always where my passion was, with technology, so
So when you get in a pinch, since your mom started this whole thing out for you, do you ever call her and say, "Hey, mom, let me just run this by you and let's see if you can help me work on some of the
uh
technology pieces."
it would, at this point, it'd be way over her head. She got out of it a long time ago, but
Sure.
yeah, I mean, she's always interested to hear some of the things that we do. They whenever somebody who doesn't understand technology as much, wants to kind of understand what you do, and so you kind of explain it, and
Mhm.
it probably sounds a lot cooler than it actually
You,
is sometimes.
you can
But
always see that glassed over look in their face, and because I'll always stop and I'll say, "You really want me to go on?"
yeah, exactly,
And they're like,
exactly.
usually, "Nah, that's all right."
Yep, yep.
Well, thanks for sharing that. So I thought we would start this out, and as I mentioned right when we kicked off here, could you just give a little explanation for the listeners what HCI is, what hyperconverged infrastructure really is?
So it's actually, pretty simple concept. Um, with legacy infrastructure, you have a whole bunch of different layers you have to manage. You have just looking at just purely the hardware, you have a server, you have a storage device, you have some type of network between them, and so hyperconverged is really kind of bringing those down into a single platform. It eliminates several points of management, right? So now you're managing one thing instead of several other things, and that's kind of the at a very high level what hyperconverged infrastructure is.
And the way that technology, and you've been around for for a large portion, we both have been around for a large portion of it, is the way it was kind of piecemealed together, and maybe that's not the right word to say that is, there were servers in organizations that did a specific job, and they didn't talk to anything, and they were never
For
going to
sure.
talk to anything. And then as things progressed, they said, well, hey, I've got this other location, or I've got these other devices that really need to talk to each other. And that's where the networking component came in. And you
Absolutely.
stop me and clarify me if I go off off the path here. And then from there, they the storage devices came into place to to really to hold all that information, and just the high powered storage. So and again, I don't mean to say piecemealed it together, but they were really three disparate technologies that worked together to give you the three-tier architecture that's been around for decades. And
Absolutely.
hyperconverged infrastructure is just, in my mind, I try to look at things really simple. It's easier for me we've evolved past that, and now
Well, yeah,
we're at a place they work together.
and it is definitely an evolution because like you said, going pretty far back, you had all these individual servers doing individual things, right? And so the next phase of that was really virtualization and shared storage arrays, right? Um, what that allowed people to do was, with those individual servers, you had, not enough memory for this one and too much for this one, not enough CPU there, too much here, same with storage. And so the shared storage arrays allowed us to share just that storage, but then the hypervisor came into play, and that allowed us to share that underlying hardware so that everybody got what they needed, and you didn't have as much waste, right? You didn't
Mhm.
have all that memory out there that wasn't being used, and you need it over here. Now you can do it, right? And so from that evolved, and to me, it's kind of a almost a logical evolution for that to kind of then collapse down into a single platform, bring all those pieces together into one, and continue to share everything.
And that in essence is what hyperconverged infrastructure is. It's
Yep.
it's sharing all the resources to get the best economies of scale, to get the best performance right across the board.
Yep. And
Correct.
make it very, very easy to manage.
Easily managed. Okay, great. Well, thanks for that. So I think you kind of touched on my next question is, but I guess we can go a little bit deeper into it. Is so when we're looking at traditional three-tier architecture and we're looking at hyperconverged, what are the benefits from the hyperconverged side that you just don't get, or that are above and beyond um, three-tier architecture?
Well, the biggest one is to me, for one, you don't lose anything, right? You're still sharing all those resources, um, but you get a lot of gains in the manageability of the environment. So in a traditional three-tier infrastructure, you have your applications, you have a hypervisor, you have server hardware, you have a network, you have storage, and all of those are all different vendors, right?
Hmm.
Typically, and they all have their own management tools, their own ways of doing firmware updates and software updates, and it becomes very difficult to manage because you want to do a some type of software update. Well, now you have to go and check every other component in that stack to make sure that it's compatible with that update you want to do. And what happens when this vendor has not qualified that update yet, right? You run into trouble. And so by collapsing it down, um, it makes we could just do, we just update the system as a whole, all those components under one umbrella, and there's just a lot less to manage there.
So there's
That's
okay,
basically
so
it.
that
Yeah.
that I kind of get that. You get the management piece, and it's a single plane to manage it on. You get
Yep.
fewer vendors in there. I think one of the things that's kind of obvious, or at least it's obvious to me, is the amount of people to actually manage that system. Because I mean,
Oh,
you
certainly.
you
Yes.
you break those up, and I mean, you've got some extremely intelligent people that are managing all of the different components within that system.
That kind of popped in my head as I was saying that, and that's 100% right. Teams would have to support these three-tier infrastructure, they would have server hardware team that would manage the servers. They would have a storage team. And sometimes the storage networking team might be managed by the storage team, or it could be a, traditional networking team. And then you have like the hypervisor team. And it's sometimes difficult for all those teams to kind of work together to um, bring this environment together and to do those updates. It becomes very difficult. So yeah, by collapsing that down all in a single platform, we collapse those teams, and makes it again a lot easier.
I know one of the big things that we discuss as an organization is the well, as an industry. Let me start with an industry, and then I'll kind of come back into the organization. As an industry, downtime is we just can't afford it. And as you're starting to deal with global organizations, it's like I had a customer that they had about an hour of downtime a month. That's all they could do because they were international. It's like we can't get all the systems patched in that time. So
Right.
a lot of things didn't get patched. A lot of things ended up bleeding over more than an hour. You had people in other countries that were really upset because the majority of the resources were in the United States. So we were doing it during during the times we could. So with hyper-converged infrastructure, talk a little bit about the downtime with hyper-converged infrastructure when you do an upgrade or a migration.
Well, so to talk about that, we have to talk about the cloud a little bit, right?
Okay.
Because really hyper-converged infrastructure, the way that they're created, comes from the work that the early cloud providers did. So things that Google did, and obviously Amazon, the big ones out there. The way that they created those infrastructures, they did it in a way at the scale that they're at. You're going to have a lot of failures, right? And so the software has to be intelligent enough to be able to handle those types of all kinds of failures, right? Multiple failures. It could be entire host. It could be a disk. It could be a whatever. They have to be made to handle those failures. So I think if we compare HCI to back to that 3-tier, they are much better at handling failures. And so going back to your question about how do we do upgrades and when nobody can get downtime anymore, it's because of that a lot of customers now will do their upgrades during the day, during business hours, right? Because the systems are so resilient and reliable, we don't need that big, Saturday and Sunday every month to do these updates. We can do them
And when
as
you
they're
say
needed.
now they do the upgrades, you're talking specifically about hyperconverged Nutanix customers.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
And because kind of going back to the cloud again, they roll out new features all the time, and we do the same thing. We don't want customers to have to take downtime all the time in order to get these new features. And so the upgrade process is a huge part of it. And the resiliency of the platform allows customers to do these updates during regular business hours and not have to worry about things going down or even performance being degraded. And so they can roll those updates out very quickly and take advantage of all the new stuff we're doing.
Yeah, and I've heard customers, in my short tenure here say that, we're not working on the weekends anymore. Like, to
Right.
your point, your Saturday and Sunday when everybody's, off and the computer or most people are off, they don't have to do that. So
Yeah.
that's not only a benefit, and I think that's a twofold benefit too. And you kind of pointed out, one is you can do the upgrades during normal business hours without taking any downtime, and two is that the self-healing piece that they just stay up. The Nutanix infrastructure stays up. You have less downtime from failure with it as well.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's the system is built to handle those failures again. And so when we're doing updates, depending on what we're updating, but let's say we're updating the firmware on a device, and this goes back to really the function of the hypervisor. We simply move, if we're going to upgrade node 1, we move the VMs off of node 1 non-disruptively to another node within in the cluster. We do the upgrade, whatever we're upgrading, and when it's done, we make sure this node is good, it's ready to go, it's back into the cluster, and we bring those VMs back over, and we just do that in a rolling fashion until it's done. going back to kind of the 3-tier upgrades, there's a lot of things that you have to coordinate. So when you're doing those updates, okay, first, this team is going to update this part of the system. Then the next team is going to update this next part of the system. For us, because it is one platform, it's again one GUI, and we know how to do the updates, and so it is really pretty much just click go and go get a cup of coffee and let it run through while it's going, and come back and just make sure that everything's finished successfully, and everything should be okay.
So let's talk a little bit. People have been living on the Nutanix infrastructure for a while now. And when it's time to migrate, because everybody has to move and they've got to migrate, those are expensive, time consuming. There's downtime. There's a lot of planning that gets involved. I mean, it's one piece just buying the infrastructure, and then you got to get a SAL put together to do the migration. You got to take the hit on the downtime. So talk a little bit about Nutanix and HCI and how a migration goes.
Yeah, that's another huge difference. I mean, like you said, the migration piece is huge. You could stand up, a new solution in maybe a couple of weeks, and you take 6 to 9 months to do that migration, right? And
Yeah,
so during
that's
that
pretty
time,
typical.
yeah, during that time, now you have 2 environments to manage. With HCI and specifically with Nutanix, when it comes time to life cycle some infrastructure hardware, we don't have to stand up a new environment and then migrate things over. We simply add nodes into your existing cluster, just do a simple motion migration from the existing infrastructure to the other one, and then take out the old stuff, and you're done. So it dramatically reduces the amount of time that you have to spend to do those migrations, because we can, part of just kind of the foundational aspects of HCI make it very easy to grow that infrastructure, right? So we can add a node at a time. We can add 10 nodes if we want to. And that hardware does not have to be the same. It doesn't have to be the same generation family. We could have, Broadwell Intel processors mixed in with like newer Ice Lake processors in the same cluster, be able to move those workloads over and then take out that old hardware completely non-disruptively.
So you make this sound really, really simple. So, and I think if people are listening to this and they're like, what it sounds way too simple. Back to your point that it was born in the cloud. I mean, think about the migrations in the cloud, right? I mean, they had to build these for agility. I mean, you don't have, 45 data centers across, or however many, the big boys have, and not be able to move quickly and be agile. And that's where, Nutanix was born from, is that same technology. I mean, is that an accurate statement?
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
something else I wanted to touch on here too is, so everybody's moving to the cloud. They're moving into the cloud. They're for agility. Some people talk about it for cost. I think we've all come to the realization that the cost savings really isn't what everyone thought it was going to be, and that's okay. There's still agility, and there's laws in different countries that you have to be in different places. So one of the challenges that we've seen are those applications that are running in your on-prem data center or your co-location data center are not cloud native, so they
Sure.
can't move easily into the cloud without being refactoring. So how does Nutanix address something like that?
Yeah, and that is a huge piece. And again, going back to migration, right? Somebody that wants to move to the cloud, it's not just a instant move
Yeah.
up there, because of all that refactoring. You're talking now again 6 months to a year plus, sometimes a couple years to get things refactored to a way that you can get it to run in the native cloud space. And so this is one of the, really, to me, been very exciting to see Nutanix evolve out of just HCI, right?
Mhm.
We still do HCI very well, but we have gone well beyond of what that traditional core HCI is. And we did it in a very simple way. So in that scenario where customers need to move workloads to the cloud, and, a lot of times they have some type of a contractual obligation to use the cloud resources, right? When they sign those contracts, they have a
They get a
cloud commit that they
huge
have.
discount to move huge amount of dollars
Right,
to the cloud.
right. And if they can't, they lose out on that. And so uh, our solution called NC2 or Nutanix Cloud Clusters is pretty simple. We take our software stack, the exact same software stack that you run on-prem, and we run it on hardware inside of the cloud providers. So we just take their bare metal hardware, we put our software on it, and now what that gives customers is just a regular cluster that's running inside the cloud, right next to their, their cloud native apps they already have up there. So it's in their security domains, inside of their networking domains. It's in their account, under their control completely, and that gives them a landing spot where maybe they want to just keep their VMs running there, but they have a place where they can move the VMs up there, meet those cloud commitments that they need to, and then over time work on moving them into the native spaces if that's what they want to do. What makes it so easy is that because to us it just looks like a regular cluster, all of our replication technologies work just like they normally would. And so we can take a VM that's running on-prem, do a replication, bring it up in the cloud, and you're going to probably change some networking things, and that's about it.
Mhm. And then I think something that has to be pointed out to do that, you have to be running on the Nutanix hypervisor AHV, correct?
Well, not really. Certainly for existing customers, it makes it very simple. If you're already running on Nutanix infrastructure, to do that replication up there is pretty easy. And I guess I think I was answering the wrong question here. You're asking, do they need to have our hypervisor on-prem?
Let me kind of rephrase what I'm saying here, because I don't know if I'm asking the question correctly. So if they're going to move an application to AWS or Azure, and it's not cloud native, they're not going to refactor it. To move it, it needs to run on AHV.
No. Okay. So no. Okay. I know how to answer it now. All right. So if they have a VM today, whether it's on Nutanix infrastructure running ESX, or it's on Nutanix infrastructure running AHV, we can replicate that VM up into NC2 running on AWS or Azure. So we've had a feature for a long time called cross hypervisor backup and recovery, and that allows us to take a Nutanix cluster running ESX, replicate a VM to a Nutanix cluster that is running AHV, be able to bring that VM up, do whatever you need to do, and then bring it back when you're done. So we understand how to read a VMDK file, and so we can bring those VMs up no matter where they are. And so with NC2, that does have a requirement of AHV, but on-prem, they don't necessarily have to have ESX running on Nutanix. Now, the next part of that is, do they have to have Nutanix at all? And they don't. So we do have tools. We have a tool called Move, which is really a very slick migration tool that we use for customers. It started for customers that are on 3-tier that wanted to move to AHV. So they had ESX running in a 3-tier environment. They wanted to get to AHV. And so that's how this tool started, and Moved allowed them to do kind of a baseline replication to AHV. And when they were ready, they would do a cutover and bring that VM up. That tool has evolved over the time, and now there are several platforms that we can use to migrate to and from. And so we can take an on-prem VM that's not running on Nutanix and use that Move tool and put it on NC2 inside of AWS and Azure.
Gotcha. Thank you for the clarity, and I appreciate that. And I think I skipped over something that I wanted to address when you were talking. I took a note on it. So you had talked about, customers, they get in that EA and they've got, the cloud commit they're going to hit and they get a great discount, but they can't move fast enough because they can't refactor that application. So the NC2 product, that's just a SKU with the cloud manufacturers. So if they've got cloud credits, they can use those
It's
cloud
true.
credits for NC2. So they
Yes.
are not losing out on anything at all by doing that.
Yes, that is
Correct?
correct.
Okay,
Yep.
good, good, good. All right. So security is huge. Are we secure? Talk a little bit about the security here, if you could.
Yeah, I mean, security is obviously huge, and it's been huge at Nutanix from the beginning. They, early on, started thinking about security and how to make the platform secure. So, and there's, obviously, when you're talking security, there's a lot of different areas
Yeah.
that you could talk about just the platform security in general, right? How secure is the software, and so we've done a lot. There's a lot of and I will preface this by saying I'm definitely not a security expert. I know enough to be dangerous, but we have processes running on the cluster to make sure that somebody doesn't do something like open up telnet or enable some old SSH versions or something like that. So there's a lot of things on the platform to make it very secure, and we can lock it down, and we support things like single sign-on and all those kind of modern things, uh, RBAC controls, all those type of things to secure the platform. But then there's other areas for security now that we have to really be concerned about too, right? We look at data security, right? So part of our product, we can store, really any kind of data. We have solutions for obviously the data for your VMs, but also as well as CIFS and NFS data, so NAS data, objects data, and so we have to protect that data. So we have tools that can look at your data and look for malware and things like that, and we have snapshots that you can use in order to protect yourself from ransomware and things like that. And then there's also you look at VM security. All those VMs, they're talking through the network to all kinds of things, and we really need to secure that. And so organizations are starting to move away from kind of the security model where you had this kind of hard shell and soft center,
Mhm.
right, into a zero trust model where we can't just trust all that data traffic or inside the data center to just go wherever it needs to, because if somebody gets in, they get themselves in on one server, and now they can just move around wherever the heck they want, right? So we have to
Yep.
treat the traffic inside the data center just like you treat it outside the data center. And so we have tools that allow you to do that too, right? So we have, with our hypervisor, specifically HV, we have a tool called Flow, which can do microsegmentation. That basically says, okay, this VM, you're only allowed to talk to these other VMs, over these certain ports. And we do it in a policy manner, so it makes it very easy to configure. So there are, multiple different areas where you can look at security, and I think we've got a lot of them covered.
Mhm. Yeah, great. And the other piece of that is, and when I, talk to folks, it's built in. It's not bolt on.
Right.
So it's
Yes.
resident to the entire build of the solution. So once again, it's not, and you get into finger pointing. Oh, that's not us. I just you got to go. You got to talk to the guy who's running the hypervisor. You got to talk to the storage guy. You got to it's a part of the
Right.
solution, and the
Absolutely.
customer service and the technical folks from Nutanix are the ones you talk to when there's a challenge or there's an issue.
Yep.
So
Absolutely. Yeah, it is a good point, right? And it's not something that was thought of after the fact, right? It's been there at least, certainly from the platform security standpoint, that's been top of mind for us for a long time. And as things have evolved, we've gotten kind of into these other areas of security as well, with the data security and the VM network security as well.
Mhm. So that, there's some security that's built in. It's resident in the technology. You talked about the hypervisor that's resident in the technology. DR. I mean, could you touch on DR just a little bit here too, and the tools that are, within native, I guess native to the solution.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is kind of a good point, right? We do have a lot of native tools built in, right? And a
Hmm.
lot of the new features that we're adding are bringing more and more functionality to the platform. But if you're going to get a normal kind of Nutanix pitch, one of the things we're going to talk about quite a bit is the freedom to choose, right? And so while we have all these tools, there are still reasons why you might need to use somebody else's tool. And when it comes to backup a DR, that's certainly one of them, that customers already have a vendor that they like to use, and we work with all the big ones, and they support our platform as well. But looking at our platform specifically, it is a lot, to me, it is a lot easier to use our backup and replication technologies because they are built into the platform, right?
Hmm.
We can replicate from one cluster to another cluster very easily. It's really just a few clicks to set up a replication from one cluster to another cluster. And we've had that for a long time, and that's another feature that has evolved over time to bring in more automation and smarts when it comes to doing a failover event. And so now we can create run books that say, hey, here's an application, it's running in site A, and we're going to set up backup DR to site B. And what happens when we have a DR event? We want to automate the process to bring that application up. And so with these run books, we can configure how, when a failure occurs, how do we bring that application back up in the DR site and do it in an automated fashion. So we can create stages to say, first, we want to bring up the database layer, get that up and running. Then we're going to bring up the middleware or something, or the applications, and do that in an automated fashion. And so it's nice having those things built in. It's very efficient because it's just using the snapshot technology that's built into the platform. So when we're doing a replication, you're just moving changed blocks over. It's very flexible in that we could do it in a synchronous fashion. If the clusters are close enough together, we could have synchronous replication, so there's no chance of data loss. But then there's a lot of flexibility after that. Based on what your RPOs, RTOs are, and how to configure that.
Hmm. So you had touched on something there, and I just want to kind of roll back into that as well. You had made the comment about choice,
Yep.
and I think there's a lot of things to the solution that are big and pretty cool. But I think choice is big, because you can run the Nutanix solution on just about any hardware. Now there's requirements that it has to have, but I mean, we're not telling you that, hey, you can only run it on X or Y. You can, I mean, if you got your favorite hardware and you want to keep buying that favorite hardware, that's your
Why
choice.
not? Why
If
not?
you want to run it in Azure, or you want to run it in AWS, that's your choice. You can run it there. And I know that we've got tools too, so that you can continue to evaluate where they're running, the amount of time they're on, the resources they consume, and we can tell you, hey, listen, it made a lot of sense for you to move to X end state, but your usage has increased or decreased or whatever have you, and at this point in time, from a cost perspective, you would save X dollars moving it to this end state. So that's all, and it's live. I mean, the licenses are portable, correct? So we don't
Yes.
care. You buy a license for on-prem, move it to AWS, move it to Azure, move it back. Do whatever you want with it. We're not locking you in. You have a choice to do what you want to do.
Yeah. When I'm meeting with a new customer or potential customer, that is one of the things that I certainly try to drive home early on, is that you have choice. The first choice is, around the hardware that you're running on, for all those reasons. A customer may be, very comfortable with vendor A and want to go that route, and then a couple years later they discover vendor B is a lot more cost effective, and so they can make that choice, right? And there's, going up our entire stack, we've done it in a way that gives you choice, and I think that's very different than some of our competitors, right? Where I think there's a little bit more lock-in. With us, we really do preach the choice, and so we've talked about AHV, the hypervisor that we have built in. That's a choice, and there's a lot of reasons why you might want to do it, but there are a lot of reasons why you might want to go with the other hypervisors too. So the choice is very important, and that's kind of up and down the stack. And I think I may have buried your question, but
that's okay. I can't even remember what I asked.
okay.
So at this point,
Yeah.
we're good.
Yeah.
No, you're right. No, you answered it. We talked about choice, and the other piece I wanted to throw out there too, is scalability, because that's the beauty of public cloud, is that I can scale however I want to, and I don't have to project 3 to 5 years out and buy all that
Yes.
infrastructure. So how does Nutanix address that?
Yeah. And so we kind of call that fractional consumption, right? If you're going to purchase a new, 3-tier stack, you usually have to figure out, okay, what are we going to need for the next 3 to 5 years, right? Because you don't want to buy a storage array and find out in 2 years that it's undersized, and now you have to add another storage array. So you
No,
have to
CFOs
figure
like
out.
that when you come back and
Yeah.
ask for
Yeah.
more money.
Yeah. So, with that infrastructure, you really had to predict what you were going to need, and try to hold true to that. And that's kind of the opposite of what people experience in the cloud. When they go to the cloud, they pay for what they need at the time and let the business dictate, when they need to grow that, right? Maybe this application gets more use, it needs more resources, and you grow it when it's needed, right? And so, for us, that was very important to kind of bring that kind of cloud-like model on-prem. And so you can do the same thing with us. You can purchase what you need day one. As the business grows, add resources when they're needed. So if you need to add storage, it may be you just need to pop a few more disk drives in there. If you need to add some compute, we just simply add a node or add 2 nodes. And so the platform has been built to be able to easily grow and scale with what your business is doing. But a big piece of that too is kind of knowing when you're going to have to do that, right? And so the software looks at the workloads that you're running, and over time gets to kind of understand them. There's machine learning things in there that can predict when you're going to have to make some type of change, because just because you can very quickly and easily grow a cluster doesn't mean that all of a sudden one day when it's like, oh, this is full, you got to go buy something that's all that easy to go procure more nodes and have it there the next day, right? You need to have that information up front and be able to do that planning. And so the software looks at the workloads, understands your usage patterns, and can make predictions. You're going to run out of memory in 3 months. You're going to run out of CPU in 6 months, right? So we provide that information so you can intelligently budget for when you're going to have to grow the environment.
And your CFO is going to love you if you, well, maybe love is the wrong word. He's going to detest you less if you can come to him and say, hey, in 3 months, I know I'm going to need X amount of resources, or in 6 months, I know. And here is the proof that I'm going to need that, because he's an analytical guy.
Right.
He just doesn't want to hear I'm out and I need it by Tuesday. What do we do? So that's a great
Right.
tool. That's a great tool.
Yeah, and kind of the next level is to that too is understanding what's running on there today, but what happens when this new project comes up, right? We have this new project, we know we're gonna need these, this many resources. We can put that into our tool and it will tell you, okay, right
Yeah.
now you have 6 months of runway. But if you add this application, it's going to bring it down to 2 months, right? So,
Mhm.
when it comes time to do planning for that next project, it makes it a lot easier to do as well.
Sure. Sure. Well, Brian, this has been a great conversation. I know we have even more we can talk about, but I think we're running up on about 30 minutes. So I
Okay.
know when we get some listeners on here, they don't want to go much further than that. So,
Yep.
this has been, educational for me. I appreciate it. I hope the people listening, it's been educational for them. Um, you know, if you've got something else you want us to talk about on the Nutanix platform, reach out to us. We'd love to, to bring you what you're looking for here. Brian, you got any parting words?
Yeah, I would just say we have kind of scratched the surface on our core HCI technology, right? A lot of people now are looking at the cloud and how to enable, whatever buzzword you want to use, multi-cloud, hybrid cloud, and that's where we can really help customers. And so I'd, at some point love to have a conversation about some of those things too.
Yeah, and I almost forgot, Brian is a fellow woodworker, so we're gonna have a project for
Yes,
him on here, really soon, right? Right. So we'll get that. We'll make
absolutely.
sure that we
Sure.
get that all out. But Brian, hey, thanks a lot. Have a great day, and we'll talk soon.